bit of introduction. So my name's Alex Steffan. I'm the director of Steffan Town Planning. We've been established since 2008. We started down in Logan, down in Beenleigh, and then moved up to East Brisbane. I'm going to say maybe 5 years ago. So we've got all kinds of development experience under our belt, but we mainly do development assessment. Paul's there. G'day, Paul. I graduated from Griffith doing a Bachelor of Urban and Environmental Planning back in 2008, and I was fortunate enough during my studies to go out and get a undergraduate job at a planning and surveying firm up in Brisbane, and that was very unheard of. I think I got a placement in second year, I think it was, and I did I think a couple of months of free labor, I think is what they call it. And then from there, they liked me and were happy to keep me on as an undergraduate planner for 2 or 3 years, which was amazing because that really gave me all the skills that I needed to be a development assessment consultant planner. And something I did that was very stupid at the time, but has now kind of paid off is after working for 2 or 3 years in the private sector, come my graduation in 2008, I stupidly started my own consulting business, which was most definitely not a good idea, and I would not recommend anyone to do that. But somehow I fumbled my way through it and jumped into, starting my own business right there early on. And so, and it paid off. So, we started, it was just a home-based business. It was just myself for 5 years, only doing development assessment planning. So, and when I say development assessment planning, it's mostly acting on behalf of property developers, mums and dads, architects, surveyors. So people who have a development that they want to get approved but need to go through the council process or the state government process to be able to do that, we handle that whole process. So lodging, the DA forms, referral agencies, town planning reports, the whole thing. So I did that for 5 or 6 years by myself, out of the bedroom of a share house. And towards the end, the end of that period of my life anyway, it started getting a bit full on, and I met my wonderful wife and realized that she can probably hassle people for money better than I can. So the first employee that I had was someone to chase invoices and do the admin side of it, and everything flowed on from there. A couple of years ago, we started just growing really quickly and just needed more staff, and now we have an office, and there's 5 of us full-time now, and we have student planners and a good internship program. I think I saw Matthew Parker is in here somewhere. He did his placement with us, so he was great. And that's kind of where we've got to. Through that, I've developed a couple of town planning apps. So we developed a thing called Properties, which is a separate business from my town planning business. But what we're trying to do there is make town planning more accessible to your everyday person. So town planning, there's always been these gatekeepers to information in the world, and it's, can I build a carport? Can I subdivide? Can I do townhouses? The only way you can really find that out is if you're a town planner, like what we're all studying here to do and to be, or you call council, and the average person just doesn't have that knowledge or even the ability to be able to get that knowledge. So we made an application that automates all of that. So that was about 3 years in development, and you can check that out. It's free to use for your first one, or you can go check out the sample report. And then recently we've launched STP Learn, which is trying to just upskill undergrads and upskill other consultants in the world of town planning to make it more accessible and easy to understand for everyone. I think the more that people understand it, the better outcomes we're going to get as a whole. We talk endlessly here about town planning here and community engagement, and I think that's a real problem in town planning. I think the lack of community awareness of town planning, not only the process, but just what's around them, is really, really a huge problem, because these people buy these houses in the middle of suburbia thinking, I'm going to live here with my family and I'll grow old here and it's great, and then all of a sudden an apartment building gets built next door, and and they're annoyed about it, and they have no idea, and they think it's, you know, this evil developer and council's not doing their job. But if they were more aware of the planning process, then they would understand when they bought the property that, you know, they are in a transport corridor, or they're within a catchment of shops, and undoubtedly it's going to be developed there at some point. So I'm going off track. I knew this would happen. So yeah, I think generally out here in the planning industry, we're very fortunate to be part of that kind of construction industry, which drives a lot of Australia's economy. And the start of any kind of construction project is town planning. So in development consulting, we are right there at the start. And, you know, I know COVID is most definitely a concern for everyone. The planning industry seems to have gone through it fairly consistent workflows. I think depending on the kind of industry, the kind of planning you do, you might see an up or a down, but in development assessment, it's just kind of ticked along. And I can understand the anxieties that the students must be having. If I can relate, I finished my degree in October 2008, and that's the same month I started my business, and it's the same month there was a global financial crisis, and everything stopped, like everything. And it was like, now we're going into a deep recession, and construction's stopping. Town planning's the first thing that stops. And it just kept going. Like, I'll be honest. I mean, it was 12 years ago, so I don't really remember the day by day, but I don't remember it being as bad as everyone was saying it was going to be. And I think the same thing is happening through this COVID pandemic. Everyone's thinking the worst, but, you know, I think the government's going to consistently push money into the construction industry. And like I said, town plan is essential to that whole sector. So.
Could I ask you, Alex, thank you very much indeed for joining us today and sharing your thoughts. I just wanted to ask you, I mean, that's a really interesting kind of entrepreneurial journey. I mean, would you say, I mean, were you always entrepreneurial? I mean, were you kind of, you know, going around offering to cut people's lawns when you were a kid, or wash cars, or sell homemade lemonade or stuff like that? Or and why? And well, yeah. So were you always like that? Secondly, did we, in terms of your degree, did we do anything to help you become an entrepreneur or a successful entrepreneur? And I guess the third question is kind of, why did you deliberately choose not to go into perhaps down the more commonplace road, which would have been to go and work for Brisbane City Council in the, you know, in the DA section? Yeah. Why did you choose to go straight into the private sector and do it like that, rather than kind of see what it was like on the other side of the desk?
Yeah, I definitely have always have that entrepreneurial bug in my system, and this is back before I think even the word entrepreneur was known to people. So I was always very proactive in things. Like I grew up skateboarding, and I was the first person of my friends to save up and buy a video camera and then start editing and filming videos and sending it around to people and putting it on YouTube. And so like I was always the one of my group of friends that was trying to, I don't know, I wasn't even doing it to be, you know, to be smart or anything. I was just doing it because I enjoyed it. So I think, you know, by the time I graduated uni and I had those couple of years of experience, there was a lot of things in the business that I was working at that frustrated me from a business point of view, not as a planner, and that were just getting ignored. And it was, I think Facebook came out in 2007, 2008. So there was stuff like, and Google was around the same time. And I was like, look, if we could just make a website that gets high ranked on Google, we might get some more work in the door. And they're like, what's Google? We don't care about Google. And I was like, then I was thinking like, well, if I made a website that just ranked high on Google, no one else is on Google yet. Like I could probably, you know, I just need one job every month and I'll be making more money than I am here. Sounds very simple, simple in retrospect, but it was a lot of work, and that whole space has changed now. Like you couldn't do that now. There's thousands of things that would get in your way. So I suppose I've always been a bit of an entrepreneur in that respect. How I ended up in development assessment was just pure chance. I mean, I did the when I started my degree, it was called just environmental planning. So I was very passionate about environmental planning. I've always wanted to save the environment and be involved, in ecology and arboriculture. But I just ended up, it was just pure chance. I got a job I was handing resumes out, knocking on doors, and I just happened to get a job at a private consultant firm, and I just really took to it. I liken development assessment, private consultant planning to, we're kind of like lawyers, like obviously without the law degree, and without the courts, but everything we do is negotiation. Negotiation is a huge part. It's all people, it's all discussion, it's all legislation, planning schemes, finding loopholes if you have to, finding precedents. I really enjoyed it, and I think if I didn't go on to become a planner, I probably would have gone back to uni and become a lawyer, and then worked my way up to be a barrister so I can argue with people for a living, which is arguably what we do now. But there's a bit, it's obviously a bit in the background.
So do you go to environment court at all? Do you do any of that work? Expert witness and stuff like that?
We do, but very rarely. So for all the students, once you've been a town planner for long enough in a specific field, you can then work your way up to become an expert in your field. An expert planner you can't just do an extra diploma or graduate certificate to become an expert. You kind of have to work your way into that and do the experience and build a reputation for yourself. You really have to be driven to go into that space to become an expert planner. There's a handful of them that do it in Queensland, and it's very, very high stress, high risk, a lot of responsibility. So we do a little bit of it. I've never been sat in a trial and been questioned on a stand. I've never gone that far because fortunately none of our jobs have had to go there. But we have definitely provided expert planning advice related to court matters, interpretations of things like minor change applications or signing affidavits on public consultation events and things like that. So the court system, so if council approve something and a submitter appeals it, then you have to go to the planning environment court. If council refuses an application but you think it still should have been approved, then you can also appeal that decision in the planning and environment court. That whole system used to be it would be very rare that you would go to planning and environment court, and how politicized planning is becoming, it's really starting to become a part of the everyday planner's job. So I can guarantee once you all start if you get into development consultant planning, you'll soon become very good friends with a planning solicitor, and there will be a point of call. There'll be lots of lunches on you to pick the brains of solicitors to make sure that whatever you're doing in your planning application, it'll transfer and smoothly go into your appeal, because you never want to do something at the planning DA stage that's going to mess up the appeal. So yeah, I try to stay out of the court system as much as I can.
So just my other question was about whether in the degree you did, and admittedly it's changed, you did a long time ago and it's perhaps quite different now, but did the degree help you at all in just some of the kind of practicalities of setting up a business? I mean, okay, it would have been a planning business, but did it give you any of those kind of skills? I think,
and we've discussed this before, I think that the main thing that I got out of my degree, there was two subjects. One was called, I think it was called Advanced Planning Law, and at the time it was on the Integrated Planning Act, and that just, and it was my most hated subject. I absolutely hated it. And I remember there was an open book exam, and I remember thinking, oh, open book, like what? I can take the whole act? Like, this is going to be so easy. And I got in there and the questions were like, this is the scenario. What do you need to do? And learning those skills to be able to go through a piece of legislation and understand it, interpret it, and then apply it to real life was just invaluable. And that is something that I do. I reckon I've opened up the Planning Act, the regulation, or the Environmental Protection Act, or any of those, probably 5 times today to interpret and just double check something. So it was that course was extremely valuable. I know legislation, it's kind of like maths for a physics, physics professor. It's like the legislation you just have to come to terms with. It's not hard once you get into it. It just comes naturally, and once it comes naturally, it's just part of the process. It was that one, and the other one was there was a course, and I can't remember the name of it either, but it was like negotiation. It was all about negotiation and mediation.
Conflict resolution or something like that.
Yeah, that might have been it. Yeah.
Resolving environmental issues.
Yeah, that's how. So that one was amazing. Just about all the different approaches you can take. Our whole job is in development assessment is the art of the negotiation. And there's so many different approaches you can take. You can be aggressive. I found that doesn't work at all, but it works for some people. You can be nice. You can propose something far greater to come back to a resolution somewhere in the middle. You can push just straight planning codes and compliance and see how that goes. So that particular course really set me up, because it's something that comes naturally eventually, but to have that grounding of going, okay, well, maybe I'll try this method in this discussion with this planner at council or at the state government, it really helped me and put me on the right path. Yeah, that was definitely, in terms of business, I don't think I got much of, I didn't do any business subjects at all, so I didn't get much from that respect. But as a planner, yeah, a lot. Do you have any other questions? Let me have a look at what I've got here. So, yeah, in terms of, I thought, one thing, if I could recommend anything to students right now, is just go out there and get as involved as you can in town planning. Whether it's, have a look at what you want to get into. There's a lot of different fields you can end up in. You can be in strategic planning, water use, neighborhood. You can write policy, or you can be a development assessment planner like myself. And I would just really promote, just get involved. And LinkedIn is a great place to start. Just start connecting with directors and of planning firms and academics, and stay in those conversations, because the more that you're aware and you're knowledgeable in that field, it comes across instantly. And that'll help you get a job placement, and then it'll help you, move up through your career and progress as fast as possible. Because we get a lot of, I'll be honest, we get a lot of resumes from students looking for a job placement, and unfortunately we can only take one or two at a time. But the ones that I think we would naturally, just by default, value more, are the ones who are, you see their name around and you've met them at an event, and then you saw them on LinkedIn, and then you saw that they have their own opinions on planning matters and issues. So they're actually thinking about it, and they're actively getting involved in that planning process. And then naturally you see their name again in the resume, and you go, oh yes, I've come across this person. So that can definitely help. Any student planner that we have here, the first thing I do is say, are you on LinkedIn? And if they're not, we get them set up. Because not only is LinkedIn now a resume, really, it's a resume, but it's also a place to start making those connections and make yourself known in the industry. So that's, get involved.
So here's another question. I'm hogging the questions here, but Planning Institute, that's our professional body. Are you a member? Do you think it's worthwhile? Does it help you or not in your professional life? What do you think about peer? This is a Dorothy Dixon. I know you've got views.
Yeah, well, Paul, you know my views, but I mean, I've personally never been a member of peer, so I can't speak on behalf of with experience or on what they do. Generally, the feedback, without putting my foot in it too much, the reason I'm not a member is because generally they don't provide a lot of support for professional planners, and that's just the honest truth. That's not sugarcoating it. Whether that's reality or not, I'm not too sure. But I think if you're going to be part of an industry body, you really want to be well represented and feel as if they're doing something for you and for your community. And right now, I don't feel as if they are. They may be. Like I said, I'm not and never have been a member of peer, so I can't say that that's exactly what they're doing. But you don't have to be a member. I don't think being a member would give you better prospects of getting a job. There's certainly companies that have peer memberships that if you work there, you automatically get a peer membership, I think. Or there's maybe something like that, or you have to get a peer membership to be working there. But generally, I think it's good community to be involved with. And I know when I was at university, they put on game nights and like trivia nights and things, which I'm not sure if they still do. Well, probably not right now, but that was always, I went along to a few of those and they were heaps of fun. But once I graduated and started working, it kind of, the social aspect of it became a bit more of a chore to rock up to, rather than actually getting some some value out of it. So yeah, thanks for that one, Paul. Good question.
Well, I say that I've just renewed my membership, and we're lucky that they reduced the fees for academic members to, I don't know, just under 300 a year, I think. Yeah. But like if you were to join, it'd be $600, I think. So it's not an insignificant amount of money. I'm just kind of following up on that. I know there have been discussions within peer, and I think it's down in South Australia. There's a move in this direction where they are saying that they'd quite like to make it like a prescribed profession. So you can't. There are some jobs you can't do unless you're a registered planner.
Yeah. And
to be a registered planner, you'd have to be a member of peer and have an appropriate membership of peer. And I think so I can't quite remember what it entails in South Australia, but it's like signing off on certain things.
Yeah.
And the state government say, yeah, you have to be registered, and registration is only available through peer. I wonder what you'd think of that. Not too much, I guess.
Yeah, well, no, it's a hot topic in planning, because if you sell a house, you need to be a registered real estate agent. If you sign off on some engineering, you have to be an RPEQ engineer. If you drive a car, you need a license. Why don't town planners who control the growth and of an entire population of people not need any kind of qualification or no licensing or regulation whatsoever? I don't think planners in the short term will ever need to be formally accredited. The reason being, private consultant planning, it just hasn't existed for long enough. And if you just go on Google and start searching private consultant planners, you'll find a lot of them aren't planners. A lot of them, I mean, my boss, when I first got a job, she had a Bachelor of Science, and she just happened to work at a surveying firm and pick up the town planning and start doing that. So then all of a sudden, if you have to be accredited and have to have a degree to do it, kind of peer, they'll be the ones driving it. So peer would almost wipe out half of the industry overnight. And then what happens? That might be what they want. I'm not too sure. But you'd be taking out a large chunk of professional consultants who built the city, who for some reason are no longer allowed to practice what they've been doing for the past 40 years. So I don't think that'll happen. I do see where they're coming from, but what external people don't see is just the amount of liability that we hold as town planners. If something goes wrong, the first person to get sued is us. Like that's our license right there. That if anything goes wrong, if we miss a deadline, if we put a typo in an email, if we say the wrong thing in a negotiation, our client's not going to say, oh, well, we tried. They're going to go, well, Alex, you said the wrong thing. Licensed or not, you're going to be the one to have to deal with it. And I don't think being licensed would do anything to that process. You would hope that if you were licensed, then the responsibility of the industry body would be then to represent you. But I don't think, it doesn't sound like that's the case. So yeah, it's an interesting topic. I'd speak to a lot of people about it. I spoke at a conference recently where a builder who clearly did not like town planners started just just yelling at me like, you're not even accredited. I'm a builder. I'm a licensed builder. You can trust me. You're just some guy with a degree that, you know, you could have a degree in anything and be a town planner. And it's like, yes, but, you know, do you have the experience and the degree to back yourself up if all of a sudden someone takes you to court for, you know, incompetence? You know, if you've got that degree sitting there, you can go, well, I studied, I did all the course material, I'm qualified. So yeah, it's a tricky topic, very tricky topic.
So we have a question from Janelle in the chat box. Would someone with an architectural background have an advantage for getting into the DA sphere?
Yes and no. I think so. We deal a lot with architects, as you could imagine. There's a very blurry line between architecture and planning when it comes to the interpretation of the planning scheme, and the issue there is people's own personal opinion on a project. I think when we deal with council architects, so when we lodge an application to council, they have their own development assessment team. So you'll have the planner, who we deal with, and they're the one project managing it. And then that planner will have their own architect, their own environmental officer, their own noise, you know, acoustic engineer, and they all provide feedback back to the planner. What we find very regularly is the architect will put in their own personal opinion on a project, and kind of have no regard for the planning process or the planning, you know, codes and provisions. So I think the combination of architecture and planning could actually be quite frustrating, I think, for an architect especially, because they'll see a project and go, you know, oh, why does it look like that? Like, that looks ugly. Like, I think it should look like this. But then when you go to the planning side of it, it's like, well, it can't look like that because it has to comply with this code. And then the issue is, well, we comply with the code, but then the next architect thinks that you don't because they have their own personal opinion on the same thing, and go, well, yes, so then the planning gets lost. So and then it all of a sudden becomes architect versus architect. I think undoubtedly just having an understanding of building, construction, design, I think all of that as an architect will give you a huge step forward going into the planning world. But I don't think it necessarily, you know, gives you a huge advantage over the person who doesn't have that background. And it could, yeah, I think I'll try to quickly come to peace with how frustrating and not frustrating, just unartistic planning might be for an architect going into it.
But I think that's where a good architect comes in. The point is, planning always gives you some limitations and boundaries of what you can do, and it's a good architect's job to be creative and create something that's attractive, but at the same time abiding by all the requirements. You know, I mean, you can't call yourself an architect if all you do is just, you know, design things no one can ever build because of structural reasons or planning limitations. That's not an architect to me. You know, you have to be good in whatever you do, whether planning or architect.
Oh yeah, and an architect with a planning background is just like, that's the dream. That's the dream for us as planners, because so we build these teams of architects and consultants, and usually we'll give a brief to the architect. So, you know, the client wants to do this. Here's some of the limitations. Here's where we think we can push it. Here's where we can't. And then we just send it to them, and they go off and do their job. And the architects who understand that planning process will get that list, read it, and then work with it. And the ones who don't have a planning background will get that list and go, this planner doesn't know what they're talking about. I know what will be a good outcome here. And then they'll draw it, and then we have to be the one to break it, you know, to break it to the client. Like, you know, look, the plans look great, but we don't think we're going to be able to get support from council. And then it goes back to all the stuff that we learned in that conflict resolution. Then it comes down to, okay, we have to manage our clients' expectations. We have to manage council, council and what they want to do. Then there's 5 different people in council that we have to deal with. So should we lodge it like this and then negotiate back to a middle ground somewhere, or should we fix it now and to what we think we can get approved and push really hard for that approval? So yeah, it's good fun. I obviously really enjoy it.
So Alex, on another topic, what is your feeling about life after COVID in cities? What kind of, what we're hearing all sorts of things, reading all sorts of things, estimates go, to extremes.
Yeah.
What's your view and what are you hearing and expecting in terms of changes to life in cities, planning?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. You'd think as private consultant, planners, we would be very much involved in the shaping of the city, but ultimately what I do is we just deal with one-off developments, so we don't do a whole lot of strategic or master planning. But just being in the industry and seeing what's happening, my best guess is office spaces are just going to completely they're all going to be vacant. And there's a lot of proof. I mean, our building, we've gone back to work now, but we're only working in here 3 days a week, and the 2 days we're working from home because that worked really well for us. And above us is some engineers, and they're the same. Half of the people who worked in the office are now working from home. A couple of law firms in the city that we deal with who had 3 levels are now going to 1 or 2 levels and sending a lot of the staff home. And I think the flow-on effect of that is you're going to have businesses in the city and the CBD that relied on these people coming to work for food, and then they needed food and services, who will all of a sudden have 1/3 of their income. But where I think they'll go is back out into the communities, which is ultimately what we want, and start going to smaller local and neighborhood centers, and there'll be more facilities and smaller commercial developments to service that community. And that'll have less reliance then on cars, public transport. So ultimately, I'm feeling very positive about, post-COVID planning. I think there's definitely changes that are going to have to happen in the strategic framework and strategic plans of planning schemes. But ultimately, I think that what the goal of most planning schemes is, which is to, make people live locally, work locally, eat locally. I think that's probably going to start becoming a reality over the next couple of years. But I could be wrong, so I might just go straight back to normal, but I can't see it will.
Well, I think my sense is the beginning of this whole thing was it all depends on how long it lasts, right? If it's only 1 month and back to normal, it wouldn't have been long enough to make any lasting impact. But the longer it drags on, the more people get used to certain things and will want to continue those, whether it be working from home, commuting less, more lively some areas, less lively other areas. Like one of the big ones that the predictions are on opposite ends is shared office spaces. It was becoming a really, really big thing, this hot desking type of arrangements, or even, co-working spaces, etc. And a lot of those firms are now going bankrupt. But on the other hand, what you said points to if there is ever a need for a office kind of space, but it's not something you want to rent permanently, then, working from home might actually mean that they are around for, on a needs basis still.
Yeah, I think all those co-working spaces, where I see planning going is I think they're going to become, they could become the norm, because not everyone can work from home. So, I've just had a baby 2 weeks ago when I was meant to be here, and it's harder now for me to work from home because I've got a crying baby and 2 barking dogs. So, but at the same time, I'm probably not always needed to come into the city and go into my office. So there's an opportunity, I think, for that localized centered development to happen. So, I live in Fairfield, and there's a co-working office space down at the shops, and it's 200 meters away, and there's a new cafe that opened just around the corner from there. I think that's where it will go, because you still need that office space, but you don't necessarily need it to be a permanent, thing in the CBD that you go to every single day. And it's becoming far more normal. Like before COVID, if someone called and they got through to Michaela and our admin, and she said, "Oh, Alex is working from home today," there's that, and I don't know why it's there, but there's that little bit of, oh, okay, working from home. Like, are you even a legitimate business? Like, what are you talking about? Whereas now she says, "Oh, Alex is working from home." They go, "Oh, cool. Can just get him to call me back." And then I call them back, and if there's a baby crying in the background, they go, oh, you're working from home. Oh, yeah. You're still getting a lot done. It's like, yep. And then it's just become normal. So I can't see that not being normal anymore. Like, yeah, I don't know. How do you guys feel about it?
I'm just wondering whether the people that you deal with face to face, are they clustered in the CBD? I mean, whether it's your clients, my guess is your clients will come from all over the place. But like, is there any benefit in being over the road from Brisbane City Council Planning Department, so you can just pop over there and have a chat with them? I mean, is that a potential advantage for being in the city?
I don't think so. I think if you were a lawyer and you had to go down to the courts all the time, that would obviously be an advantage. But I mean, pre-lodgement meetings now are in this same. We use Microsoft Teams with Brisbane City Council, and you can share screens, and there's almost no need anymore, in my opinion, to do it face to face. It's and in terms of talking to someone at council, like just trying to get some help on something or some clarity, you can't just walk in there anyway. You just you may as well just call or send an email, and then someone will get back to you. Because if you just rock up there, they'll be like, hey, who are you? What do you want? And then you tell them what you want, and then they'll have to go off and get someone to call you back in a couple of days. So I don't think as planners there's any advantage to being in the city anymore. And yeah, I think that, we could be working from Tahiti and still probably, with the technology now, still be doing our job pretty confidently, other than the obvious time difference. So yeah, I'm positive. I honestly, unless I don't think COVID's had too much of an impact on our specific industry. And all the jobs that we had got put on hold right when everyone went into isolation, all of them have come back on board. So not one job has been cancelled. Every single application is still going ahead. So that's a very good sign.
Presumably, I'm just thinking, if you don't need to be there, but you do need to be connected, then the quality of your connection might be significant. So, if you were sitting there in somewhere, I mean, I was just reading a thing about NBN rollout, and there's some poor buggers down in Sydney, in the northern beaches of Sydney, where they're the last in the country to get it, and they said we can't do anything. It's just shocking. So which could be a reason for why you go, well, I can't do it necessarily from home, but I'll go into a suburban hub that used to be a takeaway and is now a co-working space, because they've got good connectivity and they've got a good printer and they've got good facilities and there's a decent coffee shop next door. Then that becomes quite an attractive prospect. Yeah,
definitely. Well, it's very good that you raise that, because I'm still at the office because my internet at home's probably not reliable enough to do this. So I was like, I might just stay at the office a bit later, and then so I can make sure this actually works. So yeah, that's definitely a concern. And some of the guys in the engineering firm upstairs are the same. They come into work because they live somewhere that the internet's just not good enough, so they still come in.
So my concern in this is businesses, from now on, they probably invest more than office space, the software tools like Microsoft Teams and Zoom and whatnot, as well as the high-speed and reliable internet, the computer and all the gadgets you need so you can work from home. But if everyone you work with is a council or a big developer firm, etc., then that's fine. But how about these mom and pop developer people who want to develop, how do you do your meetings? They don't have access to the software, or might not, depending on the age, might not even be familiar with how to use it.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, I'm yet to have someone not be able to use the software. So we use Zoom in our office, and you don't need to maybe you do need to download it, but it's very simple to use. So we just send them a link, and most of the time, like, they'll join with the camera right in their face, and they take a couple of seconds to figure it out. But usually it's a pretty quick learning curve. But we still have meetings, and a lot of what we do is, I always like to go on site I try to, for all of our jobs, and it's really important to really know what the site looks like, because you can look at it on Google Street View, and I've done this before, and I've gone on Google Street View and I'm like, you know, my justification for this happening is this. And then council will call me and go, Alex, have you been to the site? And I'm like, yes, of course I have. And they go, okay, do you want to get back to me on this? And then I'll run out to the site and then realize that all the things that I used as justification for something are now gone, and the whole street looks different, and the trees are gone, and that's now a local shop, and that's So whenever we have meetings with clients that we know we're going to have to go to site for anyway, we'll usually just meet them on site, and that way we can stand there and go, I know you want to do that to this part of the building, but this will be council's concern, and this is how we can get around it. So yeah, if there's any trouble using the technology, there's always a good excuse for an on-site meeting and a coffee.
I mean, so far my discussions have been the only drawback of this working from home has been that negotiation phase, which you said is extremely important. Like, having negotiations with people through a computer, people have said is not quite the same as, being in the same, people just act differently, or,
Yeah, I definitely agree. The tricky thing is, and this is probably just speaking from how long I've been doing this for, but when it comes to negotiating with council, like everyone kind of knows now, like you just know where you're at, and you know what you can get away with, you know what you can't get away with, and there's almost an element of like, before you go into one of these negotiations, like, well, I know that you're going to give this up, and you know that I know that you're going to do that. So, and you go in, and it's like you have to have that negotiation. You can't not do it, because if you don't do it, then something dodgy is going on. So you have to go in there. You say, we want this. They come back and go no, and you reference the act and you reference your code. You go through the planning scheme. You talk about it for half an hour, and then all of a sudden you're on the same page. So I think with those negotiations, like a lot of those are still, they happen still naturally via Teams and via Zoom and things like that. Where you go into larger scale developments where there's a bit more to negotiate and a bit more fluidity in the project, I think that's where this format can be very difficult. Some meetings, the biggest meeting I've ever been to was probably like 25 people in there. So we had our own. There was me, someone with me, our client, his investor, 2 architects, 2 environmental officers, 2 acoustic engineers, a traffic engineer, and then council had all the same people on their end, and you're running that meeting. And I haven't tried to do that on Teams, but I would imagine that will be very difficult to try to get a conversation going that should be in a big boardroom. Trying to do it in this format would be very difficult. Not impossible, but yeah, that's probably where you'd maybe draw the line and go, well, yeah, maybe we need to go somehow social distance in a tight enclosed meeting room. So yeah, it's tricky. We're all learning every day.
I heard some developer colleagues that I know were saying, and this was perhaps in the early stages of lockdown, that the council planners that they were working with were working from home, and they were reflecting that it was getting a bit tricky because they thought that they weren't getting it wasn't so easy for those, especially junior planners, to kind of lean across in their little bit of the office and ask their team leader for advice.
Yep.
So because they couldn't do that so easily, not that they couldn't do it, but it was just a bit more difficult, that they were being a bit more kind of conservative, and they weren't kind of trusting their own judgment. So they were kind of tending to kind of be a bit negative because they couldn't just go, hang on a sec, cover the phone, lean across, ask the boss what they think, come back and go, oh yeah, no, that's fine. I don't know, have you found that at all?
Yeah, funnily enough, I found the exact opposite, which is funny. So I hate to have the opposite opinion, but I found there's because they're not in the office environment and their team leader's not sitting right next to them, we're starting to see a lot more personality from council and state government planners. So where you used to be able to say like we joke around, like we're all people at the end of the day, and we're all doing a job, but we're all at the going home and having a laugh. So where previously you'd crack a joke or say, how about you just approve it tomorrow and we'll get on with it, when they're in the office, they might say, haha, yes, no, sorry, Alex, that's I wish we could, but sorry, we can't. Whereas now they're going, oh yeah, mate, I wish I could. Like, that would be great. Just bloody approve things, get it off my books, Like, oh yeah, the architect, yeah, he's very conservative, that guy. So, he always gives us trouble. Like, they were getting a bit more of the personality through. There's definitely been, as much as the state government and the minister's been pushing for councils to approve things as fast as possible. Yeah, there's that obvious lack of communication for people to go, look, let's resolve this issue now. And instead of it getting resolved then and there, they have to then call, hang up the phone, call back, go off to the engineer, and the engineer doesn't pick up the phone, then they have to call them back, and then it kind of gets delayed a week, whereas that could have been just a knock on someone's door previously. But, it's improving every day. And I think, like, I haven't noticed it hasn't hugely affected any of our applications, to be honest. Everything's kind of just kicking along very nicely.
That's what I've been hearing from everybody who I speak with, whether it's a large firm, whether it's councils. In fact, I was in a peer presentation recently where they put up the development assessments they've been approving last year, this time, and this year, and there was hardly any difference. Yeah,
that's really good to hear. And yeah, we're the same in our business. Like, if I looked at last year compared to this year, we're near identical. And I suppose the tricky thing is, this time last year was when the government was going to introduce some changes to some lending or some depreciation. I can't actually even remember what it is now. There's so many things, but that put a lot of uncertainty in the market. So I feel like, and that happened right at the same time this year that COVID hit. So I feel like there was a bit of a drop in the amount of applications happened last year, which kind of happened again this year for a different reason. But yeah, overall, very, very busy, and council planners are certainly busy. And I think what a lot of property developers, whether they're property developers aren't just like Mirvac and the people who are doing big apartment towers. Property developers are just mums and dads wanting to do a granny flat or a carport. I think they're all realizing that if they don't get their planning permits in place now, then when all the builders are quiet and need work and are happy to do stuff cheaper, they want to have their planning permits in place and not starting that process then. So whether or not that's a reality, that builders will slow down that much that they need to drop their prices and become extremely competitive, I don't know. But I think that's why we've seen a big push in people wanting to lodge their applications and get their approvals in place.
So what's the time lag on these things, Alex? Like, for example, I wouldn't expect a drop so far in whatever is happening, because a lot of the stuff that's happening now has been presumably in process in the last 6 months to a year, whatever. So, these were already started maybe before COVID was even a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So if there is going to be any reduction, I would expect from now on. So what's the average processing time for this? If there is such a drop, when do you think we would expect to see that?
Yeah, so the statutory time frame on a code accessible application is 45 business days. So that's, just over 2 months. So generally, that's how long it takes to get something approved. It might be shorter if it's a really straightforward job. It might be much longer if it's very complicated. But I think, like I said right at the start, I think the government knows that construction drives a lot of the economy. And I know there was the recent, they did that grant where, if you're doing $150,000 extension, then you get a $25,000. So there's a lot of argument in the industry about what that does and what the point of it is, because it only meets like a very small amount of the population. But what that did in our industry is all of those jobs and all of those applications that just got put on hold for that kind of month or 2 month period when COVID happened, that one little bit of $25,000 just made all of those people who had it on hold but weren't sure whether they're going to go ahead or not go ahead, all of a sudden just go, well, we're going to get some free money, we may as well just go ahead. And I think that's going to bridge the gap between, when stuff was approved and everyone was still building stuff in COVID because it was already approved and the contracts were already signed, And then there was this space of a month where nothing happened, but then all of a sudden this $25,000 government incentive came in. So that kind of, all the people that were on hold in that month all of a sudden went ahead a month earlier than what they wanted to. So then after that month, people started getting their approvals again. So I think, there's going to have to be some, adjustment. I think there's going to be some part where all of a sudden builders have nothing to do. But I think it'll be a fairly short period of time, depending on what industry it is too. Like I've heard a lot of, like we do large lot subdivisions, but we just do the town planning side of it, not so much the project management and surveying. But we hear, there are surveying firms who, deal with 500 lot subdivisions where, they're up to stage 5 and there's no intention anymore to go beyond stage 5. And so it leaves kind of 200 lots that are not going to be developed anymore. So I think businesses and planners who deal a lot in that space, which is a very small handful of, I think that part of the industry might slow down, but for how long, I'm not too sure.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can hear, it stopped now, but that's why I keep turning off my microphone. There's someone doing a roof nearby and all I hear here is hammering away. So, and this has been happening quite a bit since we started working from home. So I haven't seen a slowdown yet.
Yeah.
There it starts again.
It's not too loud. So yeah, does anyone have any other questions? I don't know if I'm happy to.
A couple of them are at work, so they are just listening to it and typing, because some of our students are mature age and work full time, and that's also why we schedule these fairly late. But I don't hear any, I don't see any other questions. Thank you very much, Alex, for your time. That was very interesting and useful. It's always good to hear what's happening in industry and be able to ask someone everything that, you're wondering about, because we know what's happening from our perspective, but it's good to know what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me. I always enjoy these kind of conversations, and, I'm fairly optimistic about where the planning industry is going. I think there's going to be some changes in strategic planning over the next year or two, pending how long COVID goes on for. But other than that, very positive.
Well, good. Congratulations on the baby.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope everyone is in good health and all good in that regard. And thanks for coming back, and we'll keep in touch on other matters.
Yeah.
And we have a number of our students just chatting on the side. They are doing your course right now, and they're thanking you for making it freely available.
No worries. Yeah, the response we've had from the Griffith students has been amazing. So extremely proactive, it seems, which is a very good sign. And I suppose that course that I wrote, it literally, if you complete that course and know every single thing in there front to back with, confidently, then you pretty much have the same knowledge as I do without the experience, obviously, of doing it. But yeah, it's an extremely valuable course, and I'd highly recommend anyone and everyone should be doing it if you're studying town planning, just to get across that development assessment sector.